The story of Tara, the goddess who refused to become someone else. Before Tara became one of the most beloved figures in Buddhist tradition, she made a vow that completely defied the spiritual world around her. According to the ancient stories, there were those who told her that if she truly wanted to reach enlightenment, she should pray to be reborn as a man in her next life. They believed that only then could she fully awaken, and only then could she truly become a being capable of liberating others from suffering. But Tara refused, and what she said next became one of the most radical spiritual declarations in Buddhist history. According to the tradition, she vowed that she would continue returning again and again, lifetime after lifetime, always in female form, until all beings were free from suffering. Not because she was trapped in the world, but because compassion had become more important to her than liberation itself. The deeper you look into Tara's story, the more powerful it becomes. Because Tara was never presented as a distant goddess separated from humanity. She became known as the being who responds immediately to suffering, the one who moves toward fear instead of away from it, the one people call upon during moments of danger, grief, uncertainty, loneliness, and despair. In many traditions, Tara is described not as passive compassion, but as compassion in motion. And maybe that is why her story still feels so emotionally alive today. Because Tara was not powerful because she escaped the human experience. She was powerful because she refused to abandon it. According to the Buddhist traditions surrounding her origin, Tara's story begins not as a goddess descending from the heavens, but as a deeply devoted practitioner walking the spiritual path with extraordinary determination. In one of the most well-known accounts, she was originally born as a princess named Yesha Dorwa, which can be translated as Wisdom Moon, in a distant world realm many ages ago. Unlike ordinary rulers surrounded by distraction and luxury, Yesha Dorwa became profoundly devoted to spiritual practice from a very young age. While others sought power, status, pleasure, or recognition, she spent her life making offerings, meditating, studying the Dharma, and cultivating compassion for all living beings. According to the story, her devotion became so immense that countless monks and spiritual practitioners began recognizing her extraordinary spiritual potential. Over time, many of them encouraged her to dedicate the merit of her practice toward being reborn as a man in a future life, believing that this would allow her to fully attain enlightenment more easily. In the spiritual culture surrounding her, this was not necessarily presented as cruelty, but as what many genuinely believed to be the correct path toward awakening. But Yesha Dorwa completely rejected this idea, and this moment became the turning point of her entire story. According to the tradition, she answered that there are no inherently male or female minds in ultimate reality, and that attachment to those distinctions only reflects ignorance. Then she made a vow that would define her existence forever. She declared that since so few beings worked for the liberation of others while remaining in female form, she herself would continue to appear as a woman lifetime after lifetime in order to guide beings toward awakening. This was not simply rebellion. It was compassion combined with absolute spiritual conviction. After making this vow, Yesha Dorwa continued practicing for unimaginable lengths of time. According to the stories, she cultivated compassion so deeply and accumulated such vast spiritual merit that she eventually attained full enlightenment and became Tara, the awakened being associated with swift compassion, protection, fearlessness, and liberation from suffering. Some traditions also connect her origin symbolically to Avalokiteshvara, saying that Tara emerged from his tears after witnessing the suffering of the world. But even in these versions, her own vow and independent path remain central to who she is. And unlike many distant spiritual figures, Tara's story did not end once enlightenment was reached. According to Buddhist tradition, she continued actively responding to the suffering of beings across countless worlds and lifetimes. Rather than remaining detached from ordinary existence, Tara became known as the enlightened presence that moves towards suffering immediately, the one who responds quickly to those overwhelmed by fear, danger, grief, inner darkness, or despair. Over centuries, different forms of Tara emerged across Buddhist traditions, each expressing a different aspect of enlightened compassion. Green Tara became associated with swift protection and action. White Tara with healing, longevity, and maternal compassion. Other forms embodied fierce protection, wisdom, or transformation. But beneath all the forms and symbolism, the core of her story remained the same. Tara was a being who looked directly at the suffering and limitations imposed by the world, and refused to let them define what enlightenment could become. After making her vow, Yeshe Dorwa's spiritual path became something far greater than personal enlightenment. According to the traditions, she continued practicing through countless ages, not separating herself from the suffering of existence, but moving deeper into understanding it. While many beings sought liberation from samsara because they feared pain, Tara's path became rooted in something more radical, remaining connected to living beings without losing compassion for them. And over time, her practice transformed her completely. The stories describe Tara cultivating immense wisdom, meditation, compassion, and spiritual power across innumerable lifetimes. But what makes her journey so powerful is that her path was never portrayed as cold detachment from the world. Tara's energy remained deeply relational, deeply active, deeply engaged with suffering itself. According to Buddhist traditions, she became especially associated with helping beings overcome fear, because fear was understood as one of the deepest forces keeping humans trapped inside suffering. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of uncertainty, fear of death, fear of not being enough, fear of losing control. And this is where Tara's story begins to feel unexpectedly modern, because unlike spiritual figures who represent withdrawal from the world, Tara became associated with movement toward it. In traditional depictions, she is often shown seated with one leg folded in meditation while the other extends outward, ready to rise immediately and help beings. This detail is not accidental. It symbolizes a form of enlightenment that is not passive or distant. Tara is spiritually awakened, yet still emotionally available to the suffering of existence. But according to the deeper traditions, Tara's path was not only compassionate, it was fearless. As her wisdom expanded, so did her understanding of the illusions trapping beings inside samsara. She saw how attachment creates suffering, how ego creates separation, how people endlessly chase permanence inside an impermanent world. But instead of responding with judgment or superiority, Tara's response became even more compassionate. The more clearly she saw suffering, the faster she moved toward those trapped inside it. And eventually, Tara became known not simply as an enlightened being, but as a liberator from fear itself. According to the traditions, beings began calling upon her during moments of extreme danger, emotional collapse, spiritual confusion, illness, grief, and inner darkness. Over centuries, stories spread describing Tara rescuing practitioners from storms, violence, demons, despair, accidents, and psychological suffering. But the deeper symbolism behind these stories matters more than whether they are interpreted literally. Tara represents the possibility that wisdom and compassion can remain present even in moments when fear completely takes over the mind. And perhaps that is why her story continued expanding across generations. Because Tara was not worshipped as a distant perfection impossible to reach. She became loved because she represented the idea that enlightenment could still move quickly towards suffering, instead of away from it. According to the traditions, Tara's transformation into an enlightened being was not marked by a single moment of domination, conquest, or divine power. It was marked by something far quieter and far more difficult: complete fearlessness in the face of suffering. Over countless lifetimes of practice, compassion stopped being something she performed and became the very nature of her existence. And eventually, Tara was no longer simply Yeshe Dorwa, the devoted practitioner. She had become an awakened presence capable of responding instantly to the suffering of beings across countless worlds. But the real turning point of her story was not enlightenment itself. It was the decision she made after reaching it. Because according to Buddhist philosophy, enlightenment offers liberation from samsara, the endless cycle of suffering, attachment, death, and rebirth. Tara could have remained beyond ordinary existence, beyond fear, beyond human pain. beyond the instability of the world entirely. But like Avalokiteshvara, Tara chose something else. She chose to continue returning, again and again, lifetime after lifetime, world after world, not because she was trapped, because she refused to abandon beings still suffering inside samsara. And this is where Tara's story becomes emotionally devastating in the best possible way, because her compassion is not passive kindness, it is active presence, the willingness to move directly towards suffering instead of protecting herself from it. In many traditions, Tara is described almost as a force of immediate response. While other enlightened beings are portrayed in stillness or transcendence, Tara's energy feels fast, alive, and moving. The moment fear appears, she moves toward it. The moment suffering appears, she responds. This is why green Tara became associated with swift action and protection. According to the iconography, her posture itself reflects this readiness. One leg remains folded in meditation, symbolizing wisdom and inner awakening, while the other extends outward, ready to step into the world at any moment. Enlightenment, in Tara's story, is not separation from life. It is complete presence within it. And according to the traditions, Tara's influence continued spreading through generations of practitioners who saw her not only as a deity, but as a living embodiment of fearless compassion. People prayed to her during moments of grief, danger, illness, childbirth, emotional despair, spiritual confusion, and overwhelming uncertainty, because Tara came to symbolize the idea that compassion can still reach beings even in the darkest moments of existence. But beneath all the prayers, rituals, and sacred imagery, Tara's story carries a much deeper truth. She became powerful not because she escaped fear forever. She became powerful because fear no longer stopped her from loving beings completely. What happened after Tara's vow and enlightenment is part of what transformed her into one of the most beloved and widely practiced figures in Buddhism. Unlike stories that end once awakening is achieved, Tara's presence continued expanding across cultures, traditions, and generations as something alive and ongoing. According to Buddhist traditions, she did not disappear into transcendence and become unreachable. She remained deeply connected to the human experience, constantly returning in different forms to guide beings through fear, suffering, uncertainty, and inner darkness. And over time, Tara became many things to many different people. In Tibet, she became one of the most beloved enlightened figures in all of Tibetan Buddhism. Monks, travelers, mothers, practitioners, rulers, and ordinary people called upon her during moments of danger and emotional collapse. Her practices spread through monasteries, mountain caves, villages, pilgrimage routes, and sacred texts. Entire lineages developed around Tara practices because she was understood not as a distant abstraction, but as an active, compassionate force capable of responding quickly to suffering. But perhaps the most fascinating part of Tara's evolution is how many forms she eventually took. Over centuries, traditions surrounding Tara expanded into the well-known 21 Taras, with each form expressing a different aspect of enlightened compassion and wisdom. Green Tara became associated with swift action, fearlessness, and protection from danger. White Tara became connected to healing, peace, maternal compassion, and long life. Other forms embodied fierce protection, spiritual transformation, destruction of obstacles, or deep wisdom. Some forms appeared peaceful and nurturing. Others appeared wrathful, intense, and almost terrifying. But all of them emerged from the same vow: the decision to keep returning for the benefit of beings. And this is where Tara's story becomes much deeper than many people initially realize. Because Tara does not represent a single emotional state. She represents compassion flexible enough to take whatever form suffering requires. Sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, sometimes comforting, sometimes confronting illusion directly. According to Tibetan Buddhist traditions, Tara's practices also became deeply connected to overcoming fear internally rather than simply seeking external protection. Practitioners did not only pray for physical safety, they prayed for freedom from the fears controlling the mind itself: attachment, insecurity, jealousy, ego, obsession, self-hatred, spiritual confusion, and the fear of impermanence. And maybe that is one of the reasons Tara's story survived so powerfully across centuries. Because the world keeps changing, but fear keeps evolving rather than disappearing. Human beings still search for certainty inside unstable lives. They still fear loss. They still fear rejection. They still fear death, loneliness, failure, and not being enough. Which means Tara's vow never stopped mattering. According to the traditions, she continues returning wherever suffering exists. Not because the world became easy to save, but because compassion, for Tara, was never dependent on the world becoming easy first. One of the reasons Tara became such a powerful and emotionally beloved figure across Buddhist traditions is because nearly every aspect of her appearance carries symbolic meaning connected to compassion, fearlessness, wisdom, and spiritual transformation. Nothing in her iconography exists only for decoration. Every color, gesture, posture, and object reflects something about the human mind and the path through suffering. And perhaps the most important symbol of all is her posture. Unlike many depictions of enlightened beings seated in complete stillness, Tara is often shown with one leg folded inward in meditation while the other extends outward, ready to step into the world. This detail may seem small at first, but it completely changes the emotional energy of her symbolism. Tara is not represented as detached from suffering or removed from existence. She is portrayed as perpetually ready to respond, spiritually awakened, yet still actively engaged with the pain of living beings. Then there is the lotus flower she often holds. In Buddhist symbolism, the lotus grows from mud yet rises above the water untouched by it. Tara's lotus represents the possibility of remaining compassionate and conscious inside a world filled with suffering, attachment, fear, and impermanence without becoming completely consumed by those forces. But Tara's lotus is especially associated with compassionate action emerging directly from wisdom, not from emotional impulsiveness or ego. Her colors also carry deep symbolic meaning, especially green Tara and white Tara, the two most well-known forms. Green Tara is associated with movement, protection, vitality, fearless action, and immediate response to suffering. Green symbolizes active compassion, the energy that moves toward fear instead of retreating from it. This is why green Tara is often called upon during moments of danger, uncertainty, obstacles, or emotional overwhelm. Her energy feels alive, fast, and almost urgent. White Tara carries a different emotional presence entirely. She is associated with healing, peace, longevity, maternal compassion, and gentle wisdom. In many depictions, white Tara possesses 7 eyes, 2 ordinary eyes, a third eye on her forehead, and additional eyes on her hands and feet. According to the symbolism, these eyes represent awakened awareness extending in every direction. Compassion that sees suffering everywhere without turning away from it. But one of the deepest symbols in Tara's story is not visual at all. It is her vow. Because beneath all the sacred imagery, Tara ultimately represents the refusal to accept limitations imposed by fear, identity, or social conditioning. Her story challenges the idea that enlightenment belongs only to certain types of people, certain roles, certain bodies, or certain lives. Tara's vow to continue returning in female form transformed her into a symbol of spiritual fearlessness that goes far beyond gender itself. And maybe that is why Tara still feels emotionally powerful now. Because deep down, many people understand what it feels like to be told consciously or unconsciously that they are not enough to become what they truly could be. And Tara's entire existence became a response to that illusion. Maybe that is why Tara's story feels so emotionally relevant in modern life. Because even though the world looks completely different now, many people are still living under invisible systems that constantly tell them who they are allowed to become, what they should look like, how they should behave, what makes them valuable, what makes them worthy of love, success, spirituality, or recognition. And after enough time, many people slowly stop listening to themselves entirely and begin building their identity around fear, comparison, and external validation. That is why Tara's vow feels so radical even today. Because her story is not only about compassion, it is about refusing to let the limitations imposed by the world define your spiritual worth. When Tara rejected the idea that enlightenment required becoming someone else first, she challenged something much deeper than social expectations. She challenged the human tendency to believe that fulfillment always exists somewhere outside ourselves, in another identity, another body, another version of life, another future. And modern life constantly reinforces that illusion. People are taught to endlessly optimize themselves while secretly feeling inadequate underneath it all. Social media amplifies comparison until many individuals no longer experience themselves directly, only through how they imagine others perceive them. Entire generations are becoming emotionally exhausted trying to appear valuable enough, attractive enough, productive enough, successful enough, spiritual enough. And beneath all of it sits the same fear that has always existed. What if who I am is not enough? But Tara's story moves in the opposite direction. She does not wait to become worthy before helping beings. She does not wait for perfection before embodying compassion. She does not abandon herself in order to become spiritually acceptable. Instead, Tara represents the possibility of awakening through complete presence rather than self-rejection. And maybe that is one of the deepest forms of fearlessness. Not fearlessness as dominance. Not fearlessness as pretending nothing hurts. Not fearlessness as emotional numbness. But the courage to remain connected to yourself and others inside a world constantly trying to fragment your attention, identity, and sense of meaning. That is why Tara became associated with liberation from fear. Because fear is not only panic or danger. Sometimes fear becomes an entire way of living. Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of failure, fear of being seen fully, fear of disappointing others, fear of not fitting into the roles society rewards. And over time, many people slowly abandon parts of themselves just to survive socially. But Tara's story reminds people of something modern culture often forgets. You do not need to become someone else to move toward awakening. And maybe that is why her image continues to resonate after centuries. Because in a world built around performance, comparison, and endless self-modification, the idea of compassionate presence without self-rejection feels almost revolutionary now. Some stories survive because they belong to history. Others survive because humanity keeps reliving them internally. The story of Tara survived because fear never disappeared from human life. It only changed shape. And maybe that is why the image of a compassionate being who continues returning to help others still feels so emotionally powerful now. Not because people believe they will become enlightened overnight, but because deep down, almost everyone understands what it feels like to struggle against themselves while trying to survive the world around them. Tara's story is ultimately not about becoming perfect. It is about refusing to let fear decide who you are allowed to become. According to the traditions, Tara did not become extraordinary because the world made space for her. She became extraordinary because she refused to accept the limits that fear, conditioning, and illusion tried to place around awakening itself. And instead of escaping suffering forever, she chose to keep returning toward it with compassion again and again. Maybe that is why Tara still matters today. Because modern life has created new forms of fear that are often invisible from the outside. Fear of not being enough. Fear of failure. Fear of being judged. Fear of falling behind. Fear of being truly seen. Fear of never becoming the person you feel you could be. And over time, many people become so focused on protecting themselves emotionally that they disconnect from their own inner life completely. But Tara's story offers another possibility. That true fearlessness is not becoming untouchable. It is remaining open-hearted and fully alive even inside uncertainty. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more ancient stories that still reflect the modern world. And tell me in the comments, what fear do you think controls most people today, even if they never admit it?